we'll be talking about how to unlock your company's growth engine through passionate, energized, and committed workforce. My name is Crystal Metz, and I'm the producer of the show as well as the head of marketing for UPMO, and I'll be your moderator today. If this is your first time joining the show, let me introduce you briefly. The Social Talent Show is a thought leadership series developed by UPMO and Talent Culture designed to showcase radical thinkers on topics of talent collaboration, talent mobility, HR, and social talent. We will be hosting the Social Talent Show every second and fourth Wednesday of the month at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, showcasing new thought leaders every time. We'll introduce our guest here in a minute, but first off, I'd like to introduce our host. First, we have Rob Garcia, our VP of Product at UPMO. Rob is a disruptor and innovator from Silicon Valley who's been building e-commerce, financial, and consumer-oriented web and social products for over 12 years. He's a leading voice in the startup community, blogging, tweeting, mentoring, and speaking passionately about disruptive innovation, and more recently about social collaboration, career, and talent management. And today, actually, Rob will be our lone moderator. Megan is actually unable to join us. She's stuck traveling right now and was unable to join the show. So, Rob, say hello.
Hi, everyone. Today's an exciting topic and an even more exciting guest. So we'll get to that. But in the meantime, we have some other things to cover.
Yeah, so just quickly a few housekeeping items before we start off. So all participants are currently muted throughout the show. So we'll take questions via the chat feature, or you can use the live Twitter stream, which is hashtag #TChat. So please feel free to use that liberally this morning. This webcast will also be recorded, and its slides, video, and podcast will be available to you at socialtalentshow.com tomorrow. So please check that out. The show is going to be about 30 to 35 minutes today. Then we'll open it up for questions for about 10 to 15 minutes. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. So without further ado, I'd love to pass it over to Rob.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, today's an exciting episode that we have. We're really excited to have Rick Mirabile. We practiced that a couple of times. He told me that if I'm Catholic or I speak Spanish, I should be able to pronounce it. And it took me 4 or 5 times to actually get it right, even though I'm Hispanic and also Catholic. It's excited to be here once more. Remember to tweet during the event. I'll keep an eye on the Twitter stream, so throw your thoughts out there. If you agree, disagree with our guest today or anything that we say, that'd be great. We're going to be missing Megan today, unfortunately, so she always adds a lot of excitement to the conversation as well. But so we'll see. I'm counting on you guys listening and watching the presentation today to fill in with some more exciting content and questions in there. So we have a great topic today. It's unlocking your hidden growth engine. It's about people. It's about getting them engaged, energized, and committed as employees in your organization. It's not all about the worms and fuzzies, as HR used to call them. You know, it's about the science and psychology behind it, and Rick is going to talk about that. But let me just tell you a little bit about Rick before we start. First, he has 20 years of experience in applying organizational psychology to HR issues. He's been working with companies like HP, Apple, Motorola, Blue Shield, Bank of America, Levi's, PG&E, SBC, Rockwell. The list is endless. I mean, I have like 20 more here on the list. He's the original founder and CEO of SuccessFactors Systems, which is the predecessor, I guess, to SuccessFactors, the company that we all know in the space. He formerly was a partner at leadership consulting practice with Heidrick and Struggles, also with executive outplacement, but you've also been in the academy world, I guess, in academia, as a guest fellow for the Center of Leadership Development for the Graduate School of Business at Stanford University, and also an assistant professor at Purdue University. So, Rick, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Rob. It's great to be here.
Excellent. So let's jump right into the topic. So when I met you about, what was it, like 2 months ago, we had a very lively conversation about talent development and talent deployment and how talent management has evolved from seeing people as assets to seeing people as people, right? And so that's kind of the main topic today. You're going to share with us a little bit about the latest research findings about performance, all you're learning from these 20 years that you've been applying all this knowledge, and what are the key talent levers that can release untapped passion. So why don't we just jump right in and tell us a little bit about this exciting topic.
Okay. Well, good morning or good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to the show. I hope you find this useful. I thought it would be helpful if we started out talking a little bit sort of from a contextual standpoint about current talent strategies and what the focus really is with these strategies. If you look at what's going on in most companies today in terms of current talent strategies, they really focus on three things. They focus on acquisition, they focus on development, and they focus on retention. These are obviously all extremely important components of a talent strategy. But I think what we're going to discover today, hopefully in this conversation and as we go forward, is that while all three of these components are necessary, they're not game changers, that something is missing. And what we need to talk about here for a few minutes is what I think is the missing piece. I believe that the most critical part of the whole talent strategy question is for companies to answer this one that you now see is, how do we multiply the contributions of our workforce? Now, this is different than working longer hours. We're not talking about having people work 80-hour weeks. We're talking about tapping into what we'll call the untapped resource potential that people bring to their jobs, and that helping companies find ways to accelerate this contribution, to multiply the contribution. So in other words, working smarter, not harder, so that we can elevate the overall contribution of what everybody is doing in the workforce. This will become part of a company's, I think, competitive strategy.
So let me stop you right there. So this is great, because I think what HR has been doing all these years is, we need to get people more excited, we need to get people more engaged, but there's never a clear formula for how to do that. Are you going to give us a formula today, or are you going to at least point us in the right direction of what is it that gets people to that point where you're actually getting so much more out of their engagement and their excitement about being part of the company than you will get by just driving them crazy with extra more work and extra more hours?
Yeah, Rob, that's precisely one of the goals of the conversation. So why don't we move on and talk a little bit about, let's put some backdrop on this. And we'll talk for a minute about what we know from psychology. Psychologists have been telling us for decades that there's this vast untapped potential within every person. I think most of us know this, most of us agree with it. And basically, said in another way, it's people saying, I could probably do more, I could probably contribute more, but for some reason I'm not able or I'm not willing to do that or I'm not in the right circumstance. The second thing that we know from psychology is that there's an unmistakable connection between motivation and performance. These things are intricately linked together, and one way to think about this perhaps is from the science of biology. If you think about DNA, what we know about the DNA molecule is that it consists of these two very elegant but complex intertwined pieces of information that contain within them the potential for all kinds of outcomes. So if we think about motivation and performance as this very closely connected, intertwined parts of the formula for increasing contribution, I think that'll help us with the conversation as we go forward.
So we're going to go through somebody's DNA today and see what little combinations we need to change. And
we are actually going to talk about it from that standpoint as we get closer to the end.
All right, that's fascinating. Okay.
The third piece here that we know from psychology is that there's something called extrinsic motivation factors. And these are things like money and working conditions, job clarity, kind of all the basic components and the foundational pieces of work that comprise what people actually do in their jobs. But what we also know is that these things have very little to do with high levels of motivation or performance. They're necessary, but they're not sufficient. They're not game changers. The last piece here is what we now know are called intrinsic factors. These are things like doing work that aligns with deeply held purpose, developing personal competence, truly making a difference, recognition for the work we do. These kind of things are what create deep levels of energy and passion and commitment, and these are the things that, certainly in my opinion, that companies need to take a hard look at to find ways to tap.
But aren't companies doing that already? Don't they have perks and prizes and, I don't know, gift cards and vacation days and stuff like that that keep people excited? Hey, I just earned this. Maybe they like my work.
They do, Rob. But what we're talking about here is to help people to think about this, let's say, in terms of different levels. And while those things definitely do provide some level of motivation, and that influences their performance, We're talking about tapping into the very deepest levels of motivation for all of us, finding ways to tap into things that we're passionate about, getting people extremely excited about the work, not the perk that they get, not the bonus check, which, yes, is important, but at the end of the day, bonus checks and recognition and time off and those things really are not the things that create deep passion in people.
For the work itself.
Correct.
Got it.
Correct. So there's a wake-up call, I think, for business. And I think the question that companies need to be asking themselves, especially today as we are in this thing that everybody talks about as the war for talent, is that if we could find a way to unlock the untapped performance and motivation potential of our workforce, then what would the impact be on our business? This is the fundamental reason that we're having this conversation, because not only for individuals, but the impact, the potential impact of this idea on companies is extraordinary. And if they could find ways to tap into these levels, my opinion at least, and I think the opinion of a lot of other people, is that it would have a very, very significant and powerful impact on businesses.
I'm excited, but what's the answer? I want to jump into the conclusion right now. What is it that I know you're building towards this? If Megan was here, she would be saying something like, companies have been doing this for ages, but they haven't been doing it right.
Yeah.
So what is it that we're missing? And how do we untap into that potential?
Well, again, it's a great question, and I'm going to try to answer that as best I can as we get a little closer to the end, when I'm going to propose a different way to think about this than what we currently have. But let's take a look just for a minute at 2 points of view.
We actually have one question, so if you don't mind if I jump
Sure,
in.
yeah.
So one of the questions are, how do we multiply our workforce? We get that it's contribution, but how do we actually do that?
Well, I think this is the same question that Rob is answering, and I think when we get to the point of saying that I think there is an approach, I think there is a way to think about this, and there is a way to actually structure activities at work that can tap into these deeper levels. The idea here is that we need to have companies explore this in detail. This is something that needs to be fleshed out a lot more. But I think it's a way of kind of disrupting the space, if you will,
right,
to get companies to think about talent in a different way. Otherwise, the same thing is going to happen for the next 20 years. We're going to get people who are moderately passionate, moderately committed to the work, who engage in sort of moderate levels of motivation, but the contributions that they make to the companies will not be significant and extraordinary. They'll be kind of at that moderate level. They may work more hours. They'll stay in their jobs longer, 60-hour weeks, 70-hour weeks, 24/7, but that doesn't translate to actual contribution.
So is it giving people what they want, and then you're about to actually share with us what people want in jobs? So is it giving them what they want, or?
Well, let's be realistic. Companies aren't going to be able to structure work exactly the way people want it.
Right.
But if we look at it from 2 points of view, I think we can shed some light on this. So let's first look at it from the point of view of what we hear from sort of the general public. There's a terrific book by a guy named Stanley Slapp called Bury My Heart in Conference Room B. And it's a wonderful book, and what he talks about in this book is this very issue of passion and commitment and energy. And what he's discovered as he did the research for the book is asking people, what is it that you want in your job? And if you look at the list that we're putting up here on the screen, it's pretty simple and straightforward. People want to have impact. They want to know that the work they do makes a difference. And perhaps most importantly, they want to live their most important personal beliefs at work. They want to find, in other words, an environment that allows them to live the kind of person that they feel they are. So there's kind of a values alignment between themselves and what the company offers.
Yeah, that's interesting, because last week we had actually Libby Sartain on in the show, and she was talking about aligning people's personal brands with the company brand. And the company brand has to be based on the values of the company, obviously, because that's what's going to attract people, right?
That's right.
But in reality, there's no way there can't be a perfect alignment. So when we talk about, I want to live my most important personal beliefs at work, I mean, we're talking about things that HR has been running away for ages, right? We're talking about, hot topics and taboos like religion and sexual orientation and beliefs about society and all those different things. Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about more about work-related kind of values?
No, we're talking about work-related values. For example, things like honesty, being truthful in everything we do, walking the talk, so to speak, if you will, having a lot of integrity in the kind of decisions that we make and the way that we work with teams and the way that we work with leaders. These are things that are fundamentally important to people, but unfortunately, what we've experienced in a lot of organizations is these are not values that are held high by the company itself. So this is the kind of stuff that we're talking about.
Got it.
Let me cite one other book here. There's a book called Drivers by a guy named Daniel Pink.
Oh yeah, we know Daniel Pink.
Yeah. So and Daniel Pink has become a pretty interesting and highly sought after speaker. And one of the things that Daniel has done in his research, if you will, is kind of look back on what we already know and what we've known for decades about motivation. But he simplifies this and he puts it in this framework. What he discovered is that when work requires more than very basic skills, what people want most in their jobs are three things. Autonomy, which is the sense of being kind of self-directed and being in charge of the work that you do. They want mastery. This is the desire to continue to get better and develop personal competence and professional competence. And they want purpose. They want feeling and believing that the work that they do truly matters and makes a difference. They don't want to do work that is meaningless. They don't want to do work that they're not proud of. So if you look at these things, that just these two books, and there's lots of other sources for this in terms of sort of the popular thinking, if you combine this what we know from science, and if you would, we'll talk about this next, anybody that's had a basic psychology course in college probably has studied the motivation theories of people like David McClelland and Frederick Herzberg. And I'm not going to get academic here, but simplify this. And here's what we know from David McClelland's work. By the way, these people are the thought leaders in the field of motivation. They're highly regarded gurus, highly respected. These theories have been around for decades, and they still stand up today. What McClelland tells us is that what people want and what motivates them basically are three things: achievement, affiliation, and power, and some variation in terms of how these things are combined. Now listen to these words, because these are words that are not unlike the words we hear from the popular books that are out there. Another theorist that is very well known is a guy named Frederick Herzberg, and Herzberg says something similar, slightly different. He says what people really want and what motivates people is responsibility, promotion, growth, and recognition. Now again, just look at the words. Think about what we've been saying up to this point in time. These are not things that have to do with money. These are not things that have to do with job descriptions. These are not things that necessarily have to do with the working conditions. These are much higher level motivators that people have, and these are the things that actually get people fired up and allow them to tap into these passionate levels.
So this is the gist of our conversation today. This is what we need to get people so that they feel so excited and so passionate about their work that they'll just continue to do better, learn more, and be more passionate about their work.
Well, that's the ideal. Now, putting that into practice obviously is not a simple thing. And again, when we get to the last couple of slides, I'm going to suggest a way to think about this and a way to structure. And this will not be possible in every single company and for every single employee, but I think it's possible for a large number. So let me say this another way. These last couple of slides that we've been looked at, what people want most in their jobs is they want to be able to do the kind of work and work for the kind of company where they can be truly passionate and committed about what they do. And passion and commitment both require high levels of performance and motivation. So there's this close connection between passion, commitment, energy, purpose, mastery, and it all fundamentally boils back down to performance and motivation levels. Okay?
Yeah, no, fascinating. So this is actually, I'm realizing that this is what companies have been using to get rid of people.
Yes.
But this has been used in a negative way, as in, oh, you're not performing well, or that means you're not motivated, therefore you're a dead weight for the company, as opposed to use it for positive, which is, well, here are the people who are more performing the best, and how do we copy and how do we learn from those people who are performing the best and being the most motivated in the company, and try to extrapolate whatever we're doing and just try to apply it to the rest of the organization, as opposed to just
Yeah, so that's a great way to frame it, Rob. In fact, one of the ways we can talk about this is to say, rather than using performance and motivation as a club, what we're asking companies to think about is using performance and motivation as a lever. As a lever to sort of pull that allows this passion and commitment and energy to really spring forth for people.
Yeah. I have to say this, though, just because I know you started SuccessFactor systems, and performance has been attached to a very negative process so far. And I know you started that. When you started SuccessFactor systems, it was because of that reason, right? That was one of the reasons you mentioned in one of our previous conversations. But performance has, it's a annual thing, or maybe semi-annual thing at best.
Right.
And it's always a very uncomfortable process for the employee. So okay, now that you're telling me this is the trick is performance and motivation. How do we make it happen so it triggers those levels of passion and commitment in a way that we know it hasn't worked in terms of doing it annually or semi-annually?
Well, there are performance systems that are out there that actually are quite effective in identifying and measuring goals that people have. So I'm not suggesting that we get rid of that. We're going to need some way to monitor. We're going to need some way to make sure that people are clear about what we expect them to do. Yeah. What I'm suggesting is, I believe we need to elevate this to another level. We need to think about ways to structure work and situations for people that go beyond just the obvious objective performance goal.
Yeah.
Like, here's the 5 things I want you to produce for me, Rob, this quarter.
And that makes sense. And I'll take it even further down, because you brought it from annually to semi-annually to this quarter. I would say it's actually a daily thing. I mean, I come to work every day. I wake up every day. I get dressed every day, right?
Yes.
There has to be some level of motivation that gets me going and gets every single employee going every day, whatever that is, right?
Yeah.
But if we're talking about more than that, that's the basic level of motivation, which is, I need to feed my family. I need to, I have something to do during the day, whatever those things are. How do we get it to that level, to a daily engagement level? Oh, you have the answer.
We're almost yeah. And I'm not going to pretend that I've got the answer, but I think I have a suggestion I'm going to make.
Let's jump right into that. Okay.
Let's go on. But let's kind of boil this down in terms of a couple of insights that we can gather from both science and practical experience, in sort of a way of summarizing what we know from the practical literature, if you will, the books, and the practitioners, and what we know also from the science behind this. The first insight is that employee performance and motivation levels typically fall far short of what they could be. If I asked you, for example, right now, Rob, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 was that you felt in your job that you were contributing at the very highest level, and I said on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is highest and 1 is lowest, what would you say to me? Where are you?
10 is highest?
10 is highest.
Depends. If my CEO is listening, I'm probably at 11 right now.
Okay. Pretend your CEO is not listening.
Probably a 7 or 8.
And that's true for most people. So the issue is, and this is not scientific, but the issue is we could probably all be performing at higher levels. Now let me go back to what I said earlier. We're not talking about people working longer hours or necessarily working harder. We're talking about finding ways to work smarter that tap into their true ability to contribute.
All right, so you're going to tell me how I can get from 7, 8 to 11.
I'm going to try.
Awesome.
So the second insight we have from science and experience is that successful performance and motivation strategies require understanding what actually drives behavior. This is really...
That's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, but listen to what it's saying. It's saying that if we want to have a positive impact on performance and motivation levels of our workforce, we have got to understand what is it that actually drives behavior. Now, we know a lot about this from psychology from, again, decades ago. But we need to understand in terms of work and how it's structured is how do we actually drive behavior in companies. The last insight, and this one is a little trickier, is that the ROI, the return on investment of a performance motivation strategy, increases by knowing which levers create desired outcomes. These are the things that you've been asking me about now for the last 15 minutes.
Okay.
What are the things that we can actually do? Well, I'm going to put this in the context of saying that I believe you can think about work in terms of these levels and in terms of levers, and that if you know what lever to pull, you can have a specific kind of an outcome, presumably, in terms of the workforce. So,
right, so it's basically aligning what makes me excited about coming to work with the levers that can promote that excitement with what, in this case, where the performance and motivation levels typically fall short. You're going to try to turn that around to pull these levers and these levels.
Let me give you an example. Okay, just think about your own job. Tell me what excites you more. Your boss telling you clearly what he or she expects of you on a daily basis. So in other words, clarifying your performance goals. Does that excite you more, or telling you that person wants you to get involved in the most disruptive technology that's out there today?
Oh, the latter by far.
Bingo. So now what we're talking about is two different ways to think about, and again, this won't be true for everybody in every job. That's not realistic. But I think it's true for a large majority of the population.
Right. It's being associated and attached to something that it makes a difference, that is unique, exciting.
Yes.
Got it.
So the essence of what we're saying here, and we're getting down to the end, is that, and this is my opinion, that I think companies need new strategies to unlock this hidden potential of employees. Strategies that are not evolutionary, but they're revolutionary. In other words, what we don't need, in my view, is another performance appraisal system that does yet pretty much the same thing. Yeah, it's got a little more, bells and whistles. It's a little more sophisticated. We need revolutionary ideas. We need ways to think about the workforce in a way that's going to allow companies to really achieve their competitive advantage.
Done with ATSs, done with performance management systems, done with HCM.
Some of that's going to remain.
Right.
Again, I'm not being unrealistic, but I think we have to, think outside the box about this kind of stuff. So now we're finally at the point, at least in terms of a little bit of an overview of answering some of the questions you've been asking. I think it's helpful for people to think about this notion of what I'll call talent profiling in terms of different levels. And the reason for that is because different behaviors, different levers that we can pull have different outcomes and produce different results. So I'm going to present just this real high-level overview of what I'll call a three-level model for talent profiling. The first level is what we call the foundational level. And this is in terms of work now in jobs. The foundational level consists of all the basic components of how work is structured. Some of the examples of the foundational level are things like role clarity, reward systems, workflow, helping people to be clear and understand what it is expected of them. Now, this is important and it's necessary for everybody who has a job. But again, think about what I said a minute ago. Are these the kind of things that are going to actually excite people and get them passionate about their work? Probably not.
Right, so this is foundational. Everybody needs to know what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
There has to be some clarity about what I'm here to do.
Correct.
If that's not there, you cannot build on top of it.
Yeah, not only that, let me say one more thing. If that's not there, it'll cause confusion, it'll cause chaos, it'll cause disruption, and what you'll see is really less in the decreases in motivation and performance. So this is necessary and foundational, but it's not going to get us to the level we want to get to.
And this is the manager saying, or clearly defining what is expected of me as an employee in the company. Okay, so that's basic. That needs to be there. A bunch of systems out there deliver basically this, which is a way of communicating and defining the goals.
Okay? That's right. Okay. So let's go to the next level. The next level I'm calling the operational level. This is once you've got the foundational pieces in place, the operational consists of more complex components of work, and they're delivered through the skilled application of management and leadership capabilities. Examples of operational levers, as I've called them, are things like teamwork. How does decision-making occur? What are the communication processes that are in place? What are the methods we have in place for escalation of problems, for example? These require higher-level capabilities in terms of leadership and management, and these are things that mostly, if you look at most companies today who are beyond the foundational level, this is really where they concentrate a lot of the effort in terms of trying to get people to be more motivated, trying to increase performance. They look at team performance. They look at these processes. They bring in consultants like me and others who work on things like decision-making, communication, team development, all this stuff. These all also contribute to performance and motivation levels, but they still don't get us, in my opinion, to that highest level.
So there are some formal things here as well, right? This is where project management is good. This is where structure and values and rules around how teams get formed and stuff like that. That is all. Those are kind of the formal levers, and there's some not informal, but more intangible levers like as you're talking about leadership and team collaboration, decision making, all those different.
All of those things are kind of part of this, what we'll call the operational level. Again, extremely important, and when done well, they can actually contribute significantly to motivation and performance of the workforce. We've seen this over time. We've got a lot of research behind it.
Right.
I think there's a third level here, and I'm calling this the transformational level. And what this consists of is really the highest demonstrations of leadership capability. And this examples of transformational levers are things like having a compelling vision of the company, something that people can rally around and get behind. Making sure that teams are aligned with the strategy so that they can execute on the business goals. And perhaps most important, and there's other things than what's on this list, is having a culture that facilitates the development of people, the passion and the motivation of people, and making sure that everybody in the company is, as I said earlier, is walking the talk. So this is a very, very simplistic, very kind of small glimpse of what a comprehensive model for talent profiling might look like. The idea here would be, if companies are interested, is that they can begin to do some assessment of their organization using this approach, and there's ways to do that, which we're not going to go into today. And they can then do an assessment of the people to see how well it matches with what people's motivation and performance levels really are.
Fascinating, fascinating. I'm actually glad that we got to the bottom of my questions, and I'm sorry for starting to ask those questions in minute 1 of the conversation. But here's where I'm missing Megan. This is where Megan would have jumped in and got excited about the whole talent culture, right? Concept of how to wrap around not just, you have the first 2 levels, which is operational and what's the second one? Am I messing it?
It's foundational, operational.
Foundational and operational, and then the transformational. This is where you actually it's exponential in terms of the impact that it can have.
Yes.
In untapping that growth potential within a company. Tell me a little bit more about culture, so that to make Megan happy when she listens to this again.
Well, you know, culture is one of those things that everybody knows what it is, but it's really hard to talk about it in terms of a company. So what culture basically means in its most simplistic form is the underlying values and beliefs and assumptions of a workforce. It's the unwritten rules of behavior. It's the way companies operate. It's things that everybody knows that goes on, but you're not going to find it in a policy manual. And what cultures can have, the impact that a culture can have on a company is truly astronomical. Here's an example. And hopefully most of the people who are listening to this know this example. The San Bruno pipeline explosion that occurred a year or 2 ago,
yeah.
PG&E.
Yes.
The Challenger disaster that NASA experienced quite a few years ago. The oil spill in the Gulf that occurred with British Petroleum. There's been analyses done on these events, and usually what people discover is that these very unfortunate and disastrous events can usually be traced back to dysfunctional cultures. In other words, that people began to assume that they could operate in certain ways, and they continued with that behavior over a period of time until it led to some disaster. The whole financial meltdown that we're experiencing in this country is really, it's a cultural phenomenon.
Right.
And it can be traced back to dysfunctional behavior that results in unintended and disastrous consequences.
So let's double click on that. So the financial meltdown. So that would be what? What would be the unwritten rules about culture? It's okay to be greedy at the expense of others. Is it okay to, like those kinds of, is that what you're talking about?
Those sorts of behaviors that certain people held for themselves and maybe some others as something that they wanted to pursue and follow. And so just, you know, exponentially go from that point, multiply that out, and you see what happens. So what I'm saying here is that while culture is not the only issue regarding this transformational level, it's extremely important. Lou Gerstner, who was the former CEO of IBM, when asked about the issue of culture, he put it this way. He said, culture isn't part of the game. Culture is the game.
Is the game.
Is the game. Jerry Porras, who was a professor at Stanford and co-wrote the book Built to Last, talks very much about the culture of a company, and he said, in essence, that at the end of the day, the culture will win. In other words, the strength of a culture of a company generally influences and is a predictor of what will happen in the future. So that's why it's considered part of this, what I'm calling this transformational lever. It's extremely important.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. This is fantastic, and we covered pretty much all the content portion of the show today, and I believe we have a few questions coming from either Twitter or the chat. So let's jump right in there.
Sure. So Rick, you talked a little bit about motivation earlier. Everyone is motivated a little bit differently. Can you talk about how you sort of pinpoint the motivation in each employee and sort of maximize that?
Well, obviously that's a tricky thing to do, but let's put it back in the context of this conversation that we're having. In thinking about these 3 levels that I've proposed here of looking at motivation and performance, if you were to kind of blow this out and look at what are all the pieces that consist of the foundational level, the operational, the transformational, there's much more detail than what people see here on the screen. you could actually create an assessment tool. And you could actually provide the assessment tool and do a bit of a survey for people, individually or as teams or as an organization. And you could actually take a measurement and get a snapshot of the motivation potential, the motivation levels, and the kind of things that people respond to in terms of, well, for example, in your case, maybe role clarity and being clear about your job actually excites you. That might be true for you. It might not be true for Rob, and it might not be true for me. So other things, and we could actually pinpoint this by looking at it from this point of view of these three levels. Again, this would take a little bit of effort, but I think it's very possible to do it.
Yeah, because you're basically adding another lever to everything that we looked at today, which is the individual, right? At the end of the day, all these things don't work exactly the same for every person.
Yeah, and so much like when I said to you, Rob, on a scale of 1 to 10, where's your performance? Think about it in that context. We could actually deliver an assessment tool to companies,
right?
And I've done this, by the way, where we could take a snapshot of these kind of overall performance and motivation levels and desires that people have, and compare that against what currently exists, and then look at that gap.
And what does it look like? Is it more like a survey? Is it conversations?
It's a simple series of statements that people respond to in terms of both the performance side and the motivation side.
Right. And
it gets to the end result is that you have this reasonably accurate snapshot of the workforce.
Fantastic. It's almost like applying psychology to the whole company, not just to an individual. You're looking at
correct.
It's almost like doing analysis of what is the personality of the whole company, and what are the unwritten rules, how is the company overall motivated, but also double clicking into each one of the individuals.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Very interesting. What else do we have?
So you talked a little bit about unlocking your company's hidden growth engine. What's the first step, and what are the sort of subsequent steps after that to actually doing this within an organization? Like, how do I get started?
Yeah, and let me add to that. This is actually one of the key things that I get when I go to present and talk to potential customers of our company is, as a CEO or as the VP of HR, I want to know if we have the skills that we need, and not just the skills, because at the end of the day, that's something that you can quantify and take inventory on, right? But it's the motivation and the excitement to start a new business, launch a new product, build a new business unit, open a new office, all those kinds of things that is actually what gets the company going, right?
Yeah.
So how do CEOs do that? How do they go around that?
So I'm going to stick my neck out here a little bit and say this, in my opinion, this absolutely starts with mindset. In other words, the key executives of a company or the key HR person really needs to have a mindset that believes that it's important enough to take a look at this issue and do something about it, because it's going to have an impact on the business and it's going to have an impact on the workforce. That's number one. The second thing is there has to be, again, in my opinion, some systematic, some structure around a process that enables the company to do this assessment or evaluation of the workforce from the point of view of these two issues of performance motivation. Absolutely a doable thing. And then once that's done, and you look at this information, then to determine, okay, so what kind of things can we actually do to change and make a difference in the way things are structured in the company. And again, I'm not naive. This is not something that's going to happen for every single person in companies, especially large ones. You're not going to be able to structure work necessarily that taps into everybody's highest level of performance and motivation. But what I am saying is that if you look at where they are today and where they could possibly be in terms of potential, there's a huge gap there.
Right.
And what we're talking about is closing that gap, getting people closer by doing something, by using a process like this.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about, and that's great. I think that's what CEOs are missing is, how do I get there and how do I close the gap? Because I know, every CEO has experienced this, right? They walked in the office and they come out all excited about a new potential opportunity. They jump in and they say, guys, we got to do this. This is something exciting. This is a new product. This is a new market. And everyone's like, maybe you get 2 or 3 people going like, yeah, let's do it now. But it takes time, right, to get from that excitement that the CEO has to, do I really have the resources and the skills that I need, and do I have the excitement within the company ready to go to actually, do what we talked about, which is growth within the company.
And I'll tell you this, Rob, from my experience in working with a lot of senior people, and especially in a coaching capacity, is I don't believe that there are a lot of CEOs out there who can actually do that. There aren't that many CEOs out there who can do the kind of rah-rah thing and get people fired up. Some of them can do it, but in terms of what do you do after the speech, the rah-rah speeches, how do you keep people motivated at those levels so that they can go forward with either a new product idea, new technology, whatever it might be? That's different.
Make it consistent and continuous as opposed to just the rah-rah. If you're a CEO and you're listening to this show right now and you're one of those very rare people, let me know because we'll have you on the show in an instant because we'd love to hear how you do it. I have to ask you about this since you started with the performance management side of the house a few years ago as well. You said motivation also comes from feeling rewarded and feeling wanted and feeling that accomplished within the things that you do. So it's not only clarity but also performance, right? What do you think about all these new systems that are coming out that are taking performance from the formal, twice a year document that gets certified by HR, gets reviewed by my manager, I get input from all my team, from some of my team members, etc., into the new world, which is trying to incorporate social into that process, where it's not just about the twice a year, it's more about what people think about me when I'm on my company's social platform, and I say I just accomplished this, and people jump in and say, great job, thank you, thumbs up. Tell me a little bit about how you think that fits into this whole motivation conversation we're having today.
Well, I think what that shows is it's a great example of how this whole field is becoming, I would say, more revolutionary in terms of expanding the way we think about performance motivation. Remember the way we started this whole conversation was that the idea of this particular topic was to encourage people to think about this differently. And I think that that's the beginning, actually, of allowing people to experience and exhibit these much greater levels of performance and motivation over time.
Excellent. Fascinating. Well, thank you so much for spending the time. Crystal, do you want to introduce the next show?
Absolutely. So thank you, everyone, for joining today. Next week, we have Kevin W. Grossman, who is an HR expert and also over at HR and Marketer, who will be talking about how the HR team aligns with larger goals of the organization. So please join us for that. If you do have any additional questions, please email info@upmo.com. We will have this recording of the show up as well tomorrow on socialtalentshow.com, and please register for the next show in the next 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Rick, again, for coming to the show today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Bye, everyone.